still not promoted?" she barked, loud enough to slice through the clinking of wine glasses and the string quartet's rendition of Vivaldi. Her voice rang out like a starting pistol, jolting the table into silence. Forks froze midair. Even the waiter, mid-pour over a filet mignon, paused. I didn't look at her. Didn't look at anyone. I adjusted my cufflinks, took another sip of the overpriced Syrah, and chewed, slow, deliberate, like a man who hadn't just been publicly gutted by his own wife. Angela always knew how to perform. She leaned back in her chair, grinning as if she'd just won a game only she was playing. "Come on, babe. You know I'm kidding. It's just, 12 years in the same role. That's got to be some kind of record." Laughter sputtered out from one of the interns seated too close, the kind of nervous giggle people use when they don't know where the landmines are. Across from me, my manager, Daryl, stared hard at the centerpiece like he was praying to it. Beside him, the VP of compliance offered a tight-lipped smile and quickly checked his phone. No one made eye contact. No one defended me. Except one. Mr. Halvorson, board member. Quiet. 68, maybe 70. Old school. Ex-Navy. He tilted his head and studied me like a specimen behind glass. I caught the stare just long enough to nod. Barely. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. Angela lifted her wine. "To my husband. The most consistent man in middle management." Another chuckle. Then silence again. The quartet faltered. I set down my fork and dabbed my mouth with the cloth napkin. Still not saying a word. "Let me pause for a second and speak directly to you. Yes, you, listening right now. More than 90% of you hear stories like this, but never subscribe. If you do, it motivates the team to bring you even sharper, more intense stories every day. It's one tap that makes a big difference." All right, back to it. The gala had been my idea, ironically. I thought it might help mend things. Angela had been distant for months, colder, sharper. Her ambition had turned ravenous lately, and I was either in the way or beneath her line of sight. I thought a night out might remind her that I wasn't some faded wallpaper in her success story. But apparently, I'd miscalculated. Spectacularly. As dessert was served, she reached across me to grab another glass of Prosecco from the server. Her hand grazed my shoulder like I was a coat rack. She turned to the CFO's wife and said, "He's got this thing about loyalty. Never wants to shake the boat. I keep telling him, rock it, or drown. But hey, safe is sexy, right?" I finally stood. Not fast. Not dramatic. I excused myself softly. Said I needed to take a call. Angela didn't even register it. I walked out of the glass hall, down the metal stairs, out into the night air where it smelled like damp pavement and lavender from the hotel landscaping. I didn't check my phone. I didn't call anyone. I sat on the edge of a concrete planter, rolled up my sleeves, and took off my tie. My hands were steady. Heartbeat normal. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger comes from surprise. And I hadn't been surprised in a long, long time. This had been inevitable. The truth is, people mistake silence for weakness. But silence is a tool. A blade. And Angela had just given me a reason to sharpen it. The rooftop had been a minefield, sure. But she wasn't the only one laying traps. Because while she had the stage, I had the blueprints. The documents. The forecasts. And the kind of dirt you don't scream about in public. You let it simmer underground until someone steps on it. Angela thought she'd made her point in front of all those people. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the promotion she mocked me for never getting. It was already in motion. But it wasn't a new title I was after. It was control. And after tonight, she'd made sure I was going to take it. The car ride home was silent, apart from the occasional click of Angela's acrylics tapping on her phone screen. Notifications chimed. She was already scrolling through photos from the gala, checking who'd tagged her, basking in the afterglow of her little performance. "Come on," she said finally, grinning at the windshield. "It was just a joke. Don't act like anyone even noticed." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I had no intention of saying it. I watched the streetlights flick past, each one briefly illuminating her reflection in the passenger window, smug, oblivious. I knew that face. Knew it from dinner parties, from investor mixers, from the last time I watched her charm a room full of men in better suits than mine. She thought the night had been hers. She had no idea she'd just handed me the keys. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't even wait. Grabbed her clutch, heels clacking as she walked toward the house. No backward glance. No goodnight. I followed. Slowly. Deliberately. Like someone counting steps to remember where the landmines were. Inside, she disappeared into the bedroom. I heard the familiar ritual, shower running, phone call to her sister, laughter as she recounted the promotion line, like it was some SNL monologue. I took off my blazer, hung it neatly, and walked into my study. Closed the door, locked it. Then I pulled the curtain. Behind the filing cabinet was a shelf she never touched. In our 14 years together, Angela never once looked through my archives. She always joked I filed things like a detective, not an analyst. She wasn't wrong. I reached for the black spine. The thick, hardbound report with no label on the side. Only the title etched into the leather cover in small gold letters. Asset Liability Report, Internal, Preliminary Forecast. I placed it on the desk, opened to the index, and ran my finger down the tabs. Each one marked not with labels, but with dates. This wasn't a hobby. This was 6 months of deep work, done in pieces, after hours, on weekends. While Angela thought I was researching stocks for fun, inside were patterns, vendor irregularities, compliance blind spots, transactional anomalies that no one had spotted yet, or perhaps didn't want to, and one name that popped up too many times in too many places. Luminant Systems, a mid-tier cybersecurity supplier, on paper. But scratch the surface and you'd find something curious. Their subcontractors had connections to another firm, Angela's firm. The dots connected if you knew where to look. And I had. I had mapped them meticulously, not out of paranoia, but because the numbers didn't lie. The same vendors who'd mysteriously surged in cost-to-service ratio after Angela's firm took over their accounts had ties to our back-end projects. And guess who pushed the board to switch vendors? Angela had paraded that synergy around like it was a win for both companies. No one knew it wasn't just synergy, it was leverage. Quiet, internal leverage. And the firm's exposure to it was growing by the quarter. I flipped to the appendix, folded one sheet, just one, slid it into an envelope, wrote one name on it, D. Selwick, chairman of the board. Then I unlocked my bottom drawer and pulled out a USB drive, labeled only with the date. This wasn't vengeance. This was insurance. Angela had always assumed I was the weak link. The safe one, the placeholder husband, the guy who would eat the joke, sip the wine, and keep typing up quarterly forecasts while she ascended. She never asked why I stayed in my position for 12 years. She assumed it was stagnation. But the truth is, I stayed because it gave me access. It gave me silence. And it let me see everyone else scrambling above the surface, louder, messier, faster. She never noticed I wasn't drowning. I was diving. And now I was resurfacing with something sharp in my hands. Tomorrow morning would be quiet. No fireworks. No screaming. Just a file. An email. A meeting. Angela wouldn't know it yet. But tonight had been the last time she laughed at my expense. The spotlight she craved so badly, it was about to swing her way. And I'd be the one holding the switch. The house was still. No birdsong yet. Just the low hum of the fridge and the occasional crack from the old heating ducts. Angela was curled under the duvet in the master bedroom, mouth slightly open, one arm flung across my side of the bed. I didn't linger to watch her sleep. I'd laid my clothes out in the guest room. Gray shirt. No tie. Blazer over the arm. Neutral. Professional. Forgettable. In the study, the laptop blinked awake. I inserted the USB drive, the one with no labels, no markings, only the date embedded deep in its encryption. The same file that had lived offline, never backed up, never synced to the cloud. Because if anyone ever found it before I was ready, the game wouldn't just end, it would explode. Subject line, urgent, material risk exposure, immediate action recommended. To d.selwick@delcorpses.com. m.caldwell@delcorpses.com. BCC myself. Encrypted. The body was brief. Deliberately so. I didn't need to explain everything yet. I just needed them to look. To really look. The document was designed to do what words couldn't. It told the story through risk heat maps, transaction layers, procurement pathways, and timestamped flags. I'd spent more hours formatting it than writing it. If a board member even skimmed the visuals, they'd grasp the gravity. I hit send. No dopamine rush. No cinematic music swelling. Just the soft whoosh of the email disappearing and the subtle sound of the heater kicking on in the hallway. I deleted the file from the machine, cleared the recent documents cache, ran a utility cleaner twice, and then shut the laptop lid like sealing a tomb. Then I printed just one page, the vendor funnel diagram. The one showing how our internal security budget mysteriously ballooned the same quarter Angela's firm began pushing Luminance Systems into preferred status across 5 departments. It wasn't proof of crime yet, but it was proof of rot. I folded the page neatly, slid it into the same envelope from the night before. No return address, no notes, just a handwritten word in block letters across the front. Review. By the time I poured my coffee into the thermos, Angela had stirred once, probably adjusting pillows. I paused in the kitchen, watching the sliver of light from the bedroom leak out under the door. Her world was still untouched. Her morning would begin with her usual routine: Pilates, almond milk latte, calendar calls with brand managers. She'd probably brag about the gala again, gloat about the look on my face when she delivered her little, not promoted punchline. And all the while, the noose was already lowering. Quiet. Painless. Yet, I slipped the envelope into my briefcase, locking the latch with a soft click. My hands didn't tremble. What people don't realize is that sabotage isn't done with fire. Not real sabotage. Not the kind that sticks. It's done with paperwork. With ink. With an email that hits inboxes before the offices even unlock their doors. At 7:12 a.m., I walked into Delcorp's headquarters. The lobby was mostly empty, except for Linda at reception and a janitor polishing the steel edges of the elevator bank. Early today, Richard, she smiled, tapping her keyboard. Just had something I wanted to get a jump on. She offered me a peppermint from her glass dish. I took it, slipped it into my pocket, one hand on the envelope the whole time. On the 28th floor, I used my backup badge to access the boardroom wing. Technically, I wasn't authorized to be there without a scheduled meeting. But technically doesn't apply at 7:14 a.m. before the admins arrive. I slid the envelope under the conference room door labeled D. Selwick, private sessions. Then I walked back to my desk in my regular department. Opened spreadsheets. Sipped coffee. Replied to mundane emails like a good little analyst. By 7:47 a.m., I saw the first red receipt ping my inbox. Selwick. Then Caldwell. And then silence. No follow-up. No reply. No questions. But I knew that wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. Because once you saw what I'd shown them, you couldn't unsee it. You had to act. Or you had to cover it up. And neither option ended with Angela walking into another gala like nothing happened. She'd woken up thinking today would be just another Thursday. But the tide had shifted while she was still dreaming. The carpet in the 29th floor boardroom is a deep navy, soft enough to mute footsteps, thick enough to feel like you're walking on clouds. It's designed to impress, to make decisions feel weightier. But that morning, it felt like a burial cloth. I sat at the far end of the long walnut table, normally reserved for someone 3 pay grades above me. No one commented. No one asked why I was there. The chairman had called this emergency meeting and specifically asked that I be present. Daryl, my manager, walked in looking like a man on the verge of an ulcer. Eyes darting. Pale. He gave me a tight nod. I returned it without warmth. One by one, the senior leadership team filed in. Legal. Risk. Audit. Ops. Everyone had received the document. Everyone had read it. And no one could pretend otherwise. Not today. Selwick entered last. No briefcase. No pleasantries. He simply walked to the head of the table, dropped a printed copy of my report in front of him with a soft thud, and said, "Let's begin." What followed wasn't chaos. It was precision dissection. Page by page, they walked through the risk exposure. How Luminant Systems had gone from a Tier 3 vendor to exclusive provider within 3 quarters. How their billing had spiked 41% without any increase in deliverables. How internal firewall flags were manually overridden during 3 major pushes last year, coinciding with a reorg Angela herself had helped initiate. Selwick didn't look at me as he spoke. He didn't have to. The report spoke louder. Then came the word that shifted the air: insider access. Caldwell, head of legal, tapped a specific email printed in the appendix. An internal summary from Angela's firm referencing anticipated green lights from the inside and asset class shifts aligned with pre-contract approval. It wasn't enough to convict anyone yet, but it was more than enough to cause panic. The words weren't speculative. They were actionable. And then it happened. Selwick's assistant stepped in, handed him a phone mid-sentence. He stared at the screen, face unreadable, then answered with one quiet word. Yes? A pause. Then, a steel-hard, no. She wasn't authorized. Confirmed. Another pause. Then, softer, but colder. Call her in. He handed the phone back and turned to legal. Loop in their compliance office. Start joint review procedures. Effective immediately. It was 8:02 a.m. At that exact minute, 3 floors down, in a different glass tower across the city, Angela's phone lit up. Her boss, a man named Warner whose veins ran on caffeine and fear, was pacing in front of his window, voice tight. What did you do? Angela was still in silk pajamas, coffee half drunk. She blinked. What? I just woke up. They're in an emergency board meeting. They're bored. At Delcorp. They're naming you. And your project. Something about exposure, about Luminant. She laughed. That's ridiculous. I didn't. They're asking for you. Personally. Silence. He added, quieter. They have documents, Angela. Names. Patterns. One of them connects directly to you. Something about your name being attached to a recommendation and vendor interactions. I didn't, she started, but it didn't matter. The line went dead. In our boardroom, Selwick stood. We'll take a recess. Caldwell, stay behind. Richard, you too. Everyone else filed out. Caldwell finally looked directly at me. Is there more? I met his stare. There's a second drive. Selwick's jaw flexed. Get it? No thank you. No handshake. No false niceties. Because they knew something now that Angela never did. I hadn't submitted this report out of duty. I'd done it with precision. With patience. With purpose. Angela had danced too close to the fire and mistaken the silence around her for approval. She never saw the man in the corner, behind the spreadsheet, who never raised his voice, but never stopped watching. Now the company was in DEFCON mode. And Angela? She was walking straight into it. Not as a VP, not as a guest, but as an exhibit. At precisely 12:03 p.m., Angela walked into the ninth floor compliance wing of her firm, hair twisted into a bun so tight it made her temples ache. Her blouse was pristine white, pressed stiff with starch, and her heels clicked with that rehearsed blend of authority and control. But her eyes gave her away. The mask of composure couldn't fully bury the flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, uncertainty. Warner was already waiting in conference room C, the glass-walled one usually reserved for VIP clients or employee terminations. The blinds were drawn. He didn't greet her, didn't offer water. He simply gestured to the seat across from him, where a folder with her name printed in all caps sat untouched. She sat, quietly, trying to read his expression. Finally, he spoke. Angela, this is informal, for now, but legal is looping in shortly. She narrowed her eyes. For what? He opened the folder without looking at it, tapped the inside. Vendor activity, specifically Luminant. Your name appears on the approval forms tied to their shift to Tier 1 status. That decision coincided with a pattern of trades, irregular ones. And there's language in intercompany memos that suggests prior knowledge. Timing matters here. She scoffed. Are you serious? Luminant's growth was a win for both companies. We all knew that. There's nothing irregular. Angela. He didn't raise his voice. Just said her name like a warning shot. This came from Delcorp's board. Directly. They flagged it as material risk. They're preparing an external audit. We're being forced into a joint compliance review. That means full transparency. Emails. Financials. Project histories. Her jaw locked. Who, she asked. Doesn't matter. Angela's hand slid under the table, fumbling for her phone like a lifeline. She opened her messages and typed 2 words. Did you say something? She stared at the screen. The message showed read, but no reply. She waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. He knew. She could feel it now. Not just suspicion, but the unmistakable weight of design. This wasn't a random audit. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had laid the groundwork. Someone had waited. Warner tapped the table. Did you ever discuss Delcorp's security restructuring internally before the vendor switch? No. Did you or anyone you manage ever receive compensation, gifts, or offers from Luminant or its subsidiaries? She blinked. No. Did you send or receive any communications referencing access to privileged procurement schedules or pending departmental reorganizations? No, she snapped. Then caught herself. Warner stared. Angela folded her arms, voice quieter. I'll wait for legal. He nodded once. Good idea. The meeting ended without resolution, but the hallway outside buzzed louder than when she'd entered. Emails were flying. Compliance teams from both firms were already cross-sharing data, unusual for preliminary inquiries. And someone had approved a temporary access lockout for 2 Luminant-facing departments. Angela stood in front of the elevator, phone clutched like a blade. Still no message from Richard. She opened her photo gallery, scrolled through the gala pictures. She stopped on one, the moment she raised her glass and delivered that line. Still not promoted? Her smirk looked different now, almost juvenile, like watching a child tug on a tiger's tail, unaware it's awake. She backed out of photos, checked her email. Internal legal had just booked a 4 p.m. session. No subject line, just a time and a room number. 2 hours later, she sat across from the firm's general counsel, watching as a laptop screen lit up with a string of emails, her own, forwarded anonymously, flagged in red. Is this your message? The lawyer asked. Angela didn't speak. didn't nod, but her eyes read every line. Subject, green light coming. Quiet access already in motion, winky face. Another, we're ahead of them. Don't worry, my end is locked. The timestamps were damning. They coincided with trades, with recommendations, with approvals, with him. Someone had these emails, had saved them, and now they were burning holes through the veneer of her career. Angela leaned back, suddenly cold despite the heat prickling her skin. She was in a room full of fire and couldn't find the exits. And the only man who might have shown her the way was done answering her messages. The conference room they brought me to wasn't one of the usual ones. No glass walls, no view of the skyline. This one was deep in the executive wing, shielded by layers of keycard security and NDA-bound silence. It had a single long table, blackout blinds, and a whiteboard that hadn't seen natural light in years. The kind of room where careers went to die or be rewritten. Selwick sat at the head, legal counsel on one side, risk and audit on the other. A laptop was already hooked to the monitor, and they'd printed hard copies of the report. Not my original one, the updated version. The one I'd spent the weekend refining. The one that now included names, dates, trades, and screenshots. I didn't fidget. I didn't clear my throat or make a show of nervousness. I just began. Let's start with March, I said, bringing up the first chart. Vendor priority shifts. Luminant was moved to Tier 1 across 4 procurement channels in under 30 days. Normal timeline is 90. A few nods. One raised eyebrow. The approvals were backdated to align with a retroactive budget reallocation. That budget line was introduced during Angela Carlisle's intercompany presentation, attached as Appendix C. Legal leaned forward. She authored the presentation? Yes. Her metadata is on the slide deck. Timestamped the night before the budget vote. Next slide. Simultaneously, 2 junior traders at her firm placed volume orders in Luminant's parent company, disguising the intent through an ETF shuffle. The ETF was dumped 5 hours after the contract announcement. Another murmur. Selwick cut in. Correlation doesn't equal causation, Richard. Correct. But causation comes next, I said, moving to the email printout. Dated 6 months ago. Forwarded anonymously. From Angela. Subject line. Backdoor access isn't just a metaphor, winky face. Inside, a thread between her and a portfolio analyst. She joked about massaging the dates, called it a win for agile partnership, and mentioned soft approvals from Delcorp before the ink's even dry. No ambiguity. No deniability. This was sent to my internal tipline account, I explained. Whoever sent it removed their name. But the headers remained intact. Legal confirmed the routing path. The message originated from her firm's IP range. Legal counsel leaned back. We now have potential evidence of pre-approval coordination, access abuse, and material non-public information being used for financial gain. I didn't respond. I let the sentence hang in the room. Selwick finally spoke. Who else knows? Only this room, I replied. But the clock's ticking. The audit teams will piece this together soon enough. This gives us narrative control. Risk shifted in his seat. What's your recommendation? Containment. Internal action first. Full cooperation second. And if necessary, referral to regulatory authorities. But we stay ahead of it. We don't bury it. There was a pause. Then Selwick nodded. Draft the protocol. That was it. No applause. No back pats. No handshakes. But a shift had happened. The kind that doesn't show up in emails, but in posture, in glances, in who leans forward when you speak, and who doesn't interrupt you anymore. By the time I returned to my office, the hallway buzzed with hushed voices. Something had spread. Not the full story, but whispers. People who'd never asked about my work now avoided my door like it might explode. And then, just before lunch, I received a message. From compliance. Internal only. The subject, Flag Communications, Carlisle, A. It included more emails. More dates. A timeline of who knew what and when. Most damning of all, a pattern of approvals on projects Angela had spearheaded, each overlapping with Luminant's mysterious growth spurts. They had her calendar entries. They had her Slack logs. They had a text she'd sent to a junior staffer. Let me worry about Delcorp. Just smile when they sign. By midweek, her name had moved from whispered suspicion to spoken fact. Angela Carlisle. Not just a name in the margins. Now the headline. Now the face of the storm. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the hallway mirror. Angela's heels echoed like gunshots across the wood floors as she stormed into the kitchen, lips pressed into a line so tight it looked painful. Her bag dropped with a thud onto the marble island. nearly knocking over the fruit bowl. "They locked me out," she hissed. "Do you hear me? Locked. Me. Out." I didn't look up from the kettle. I get to the elevator, swipe my card, nothing. Try the office? Dead. Security handed me an envelope and a clipboard like I was a temp contractor. Her voice rose in pitch, disbelief curdling into rage. "Then IT deactivates my company email while I'm still standing in the damn lobby." I poured hot water into my mug, stirred. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon, left over from a quiet breakfast she hadn't noticed. Her voice dropped to a growl. "This was you, wasn't it?" I finally turned. She was in full war paint. Perfect foundation, lashes still curled, hair wound in that too-tight bun that now looked like a helmet. But the edges were fraying. The left earring was missing, and her voice trembled just enough to betray what she was desperate to hide. Fear. "You're doing this," she said. "You fed them something. This is payback. You're using them to humiliate me." I walked past her without a word and opened the side cabinet above the wine rack. Pulled out a manila folder, thick, sealed, labeled only with one thing: a date. Set it on the kitchen counter. Pushed it across the marble, slow and silent, until it stopped in front of her. Angela stared at it like it might explode. "What is this?" she snapped. I walked back to my seat and took a sip of tea. She hesitated, then ripped the flap open and slid the contents out. One sheet. A printed email. Her email. Subject: "Backdoor access isn't just a metaphor," winky face. Beneath it, the forwarded header: "Internal routing. Delivery time." And beneath that, a notarization stamp from an independent verification service. Date sealed, 3 months ago. Angela's lips moved, silently rereading her own words like they were written in another language. She set the paper down, carefully, then looked at me. "You saved this." Her voice was no longer sharp. It was hollow. I said nothing. "You planned this?" she asked again. "You waited?" Still nothing. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "This was a private joke," she tried. "It's being taken out of context. That's not a crime. People exaggerate. Not when those people are negotiating vendor contracts with insider access." I finally said, voice flat. That was the only line I gave her. The only one she was going to get. She sank onto the bar stool slowly, eyes on the page like it was a death certificate. Her hands curled inward, fingers clawing lightly at the edges. Not tearing, just gripping, as if she could hold the lie in place long enough to make it real again. "You're ending my career," she whispered. "You're ending me." No response. She looked up. "I gave up everything for us. You think this is just about some email? Some vendor?" Her voice cracked. "I built something. You don't get to tear it down because your ego got bruised at a dinner table." I stood, gathered my mug, washed it in the sink. "You didn't build anything," I said over my shoulder. "You just borrowed it. From people who didn't know they were lending." I turned to her fully now. "And some of us kept receipts." Angela sat frozen, the folder still open in front of her. For the first time in the 15 years I'd known her, she didn't have a single comeback. She wasn't just fired. She wasn't just exposed. She was irrelevant now, powerless, not because she lost status, but because for the first time in her life, she had no script to read from, no one to lie to, and the silence? It was deafening. Friday morning started the same as every other. A black coffee, quiet walk to the mailbox, the smell of late October, wet leaves, distant smoke from someone's early fireplace, the promise of cold not far behind. But when I opened my work email at 7:02 a.m., the header stood out like a flare in fog. Subject: Organizational realignment. Internal communication only. I clicked. And read. By 7:04, I'd read it twice. By 7:10, 3 former executives had called each other. By 7:15, Slack was a war zone of private threads and scrambled guesses. And by 8 a.m., every single department head at Delcorp had a new reality. Effective immediately, Richard Carlisle is appointed Executive Director of Integrity and Risk Oversight. This newly created division will report directly to the board and operate independently from traditional compliance channels. There was no meeting, no press release, just a quiet email. But the implications were louder than any podium speech. No dotted lines, no VPs to report to, no approval loops, just me and the board. I sat at my usual desk for 23 more minutes before the relocation request came in from facilities. New office setup to begin Monday, 31st floor, East Wing. Full privacy installation. Soundproofing included. It hadn't just happened. This had been planned. Which meant that while I was laying the trail, someone else had already started building the tower. Angela was right about one thing. I hadn't been promoted in over a decade. I'd been positioned. Meanwhile, her name was beginning to do laps around the finance blogosphere. Not full-blown scandal, yet. Just curious whispers. Phrases like vendor entanglements, pending internal review, and administrative leave during investigation. A photo leaked, her walking out of her firm's office, escorted not by security, but by someone in legal. No cuffs, no drama, just a tote bag, sunglasses, and a silence the internet couldn't quite interpret. I didn't share the article, didn't bookmark it, but I saw it. And more importantly, I knew who leaked it. Whispers have currency, and right now, Angela's balance was hemorrhaging. At the gala, people had laughed at me. Now, they avoided eye contact in the elevators. I passed Selwick in the hallway and he offered the kind of nod that means, don't say it. Just do what needs to be done. I received no formal congratulations. No flowers. No plaque. Just access. New credentials. Boardroom clearance. And 3 direct requests from senior leadership to review their division's vendor strategies before the year-end audit. The walls of the firm shifted around me. Quietly. Like an old building acknowledging a new owner had arrived. At home, Angela hadn't spoken to me in 3 days. Her phone buzzed often, but she rarely answered. When she did, she'd step into the garage or the guest room. Her voice, once slicing and confident, had grown pinched and clipped, like someone constantly swallowing glass. She still hadn't asked me why. Why I had the email. Why I waited. Why now? And I wasn't going to tell her. Because that would imply this was about revenge. It wasn't. It was about gravity. About letting things fall in the direction they were always destined to, once you stopped holding them up. I had held up her illusions for years. Let her build her narrative on my silence, on my restraint, on the fiction that I needed her more than she needed me. But now, that illusion was over. And in its place, a very real, very visible reshaping of the company. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. Angela could feel the power shift every time I passed her in the kitchen without flinching. Because the man who used to apologize after her tantrums was now the one being CC'd on internal investigations. It was Saturday afternoon when she found them. The house was quiet, the kind of dead quiet that settles in after something permanent has snapped, but hasn't been named yet. Angela had gone out that morning, probably to the club or to meet some PR contacts still willing to be seen with her. When she came back, heels clicking against the stone entryway, sunglasses still on despite the overcast sky, she didn't immediately notice the envelope. It was placed neatly on the foyer table. No legal courier. No knock on the door. Just waiting, silently, like it had grown there overnight. She set her purse down, slid her fingers under the flap, and pulled out the stack of papers. Her name, printed in full. Mine too. Filed. Signed. Stamped by the clerk of court 2 days earlier. On top of the folder was a handwritten note, short and surgical. I was never the one holding you back. You were. No, dear Angela. No farewell. Just that sentence. A quiet, absolute guillotine. She stood there for almost a full minute, unmoving. Just holding the pages, eyes darting, rereading the same lines like they might change. Her face didn't crack, not yet. But her breathing changed. Quick and shallow. Hands trembling slightly now, betraying the rage storm she was choking back. Then came the calls. First one, then 3 more in the next 10 minutes. I saw them light up my phone from across the room. Angela. Angela, 2. Angela, 3. Angela, voicemail. I didn't pick up. I didn't even open the notifications. Because there was nothing left to say. She didn't want a conversation. She wanted a rewrite. But the script had ended, and I wasn't one of her lines anymore. By evening, I saw she'd texted. A long thread. Apologies mingled with bargaining. Offers of therapy. Statements like, we can rebuild this, and, you know they're making it worse than it is. She even tried flattery. You're a bigger man than this. I didn't reply. The final message came just before midnight. You win. Just, please don't go public. It'll ruin me. Funny how quickly the tone changed once silence showed up with paperwork. But here's the truth. There was nothing to ruin. She had built her world like a house of cards, with charm, pressure, and illusion. But it wasn't built to last. It was built to lean. On lies. On people. On the kind of power that doesn't belong to you, but temporarily answers when you call. When I stopped answering, the whole thing collapsed. Sunday morning, I walked into the kitchen. She wasn't home, but I saw the envelope. Open. Pages dog-eared, then flattened again like she tried to pretend they hadn't been. Her signature was there. Angry. Crooked. On the counter beside it, her wedding ring sat face down. Not placed. Just dropped. It was the only time she ever left something without performing it. She didn't take any of her clothes. Didn't pack a bag. She'd probably gone to her sister's or a hotel. Somewhere she could say, "He blindsided me," and they'd nod and pretend not to know the headlines. But no one really bought it anymore. The story had been told, and it wasn't hers. That weekend, people started calling me. Not just board members, not just execs, but quiet allies from places I never expected. People who had stayed silent when she was loud. People who'd noticed her tactics, just like I had, but never dared speak up. Until now. It turns out, when someone sets the house on fire and walks out with a match, the neighbors remember who smelled smoke first. Angela had spent years playing chess like it was poker, and I'd just flipped the board over without touching a single piece. The boardroom was colder than usual that morning, not in temperature, but in tone. The windows behind Selwick were shut tight, the skyline muffled under low-hanging clouds, and the mood around the table was less executive review and more final judgment. This wasn't about direction anymore. It was about aftermath. Angela's name came up exactly once. Caldwell, head of legal, slid a folder across the table without ceremony. Carlisle versus Carlisle, civil action, pre-litigation options, the tab read. He looked at me. Not with pressure, just professional obligation. We've compiled everything. Insider leverage, misrepresentation, reputational damage, probable breach of fiduciary expectations. If you want to pursue damages, we can move quickly. The room was quiet. They weren't waiting for drama. They expected calculation. A strategy. Some kind of surgical endnote to a very public unspooling. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and shook my head. No. No one spoke for a moment. I clarified. I don't want the money. I don't want the headlines. I don't want to give her an audience. Selwick studied me. You're sure? I am. Caldwell closed the folder. Then we'll log it and archive. That was it. No gasps. No applause. Just a collective acceptance that the storm had passed and the damage had been absorbed. And not by me. They moved on. Vendor reassignments. Year-end projections. Risk evaluations for Q1. I contributed. Took notes. Did my job. When the meeting ended, I gathered my documents and stood. Halfway to the door, Selwick stopped me. Richard. I turned. He walked over slowly. No suit jacket today. Just the navy vest he always wore when meetings involved people, not numbers. I've worked with a lot of men, he said, voice low. Most swing at the first insult, or leak at the first hint of betrayal. But you, he paused. Your discretion speaks louder than any press release. I didn't reply, just nodded once. That was the only approval I ever needed. I walked through the hallway, past the admin desks, past the portraits of former executives mounted along the curved wall. The elevator chimed softly in the distance. The same elevator she and I once took together, late for a gala, her heels clacking, her laugh echoing across the glass atrium like a warning I didn't know how to read yet. Back then, she'd laugh because she thought she'd won. Now, there was no laughter. Just me. I passed the glass doors at the entrance to the executive wing, the same ones she once paused at to deliver her cutting line in front of half the board. Still not promoted? This time, there were no eyes watching. No guests. No wine. Just the faint hum of the office and the sound of the elevator doors sliding open. I stepped inside. Alone. The doors closed behind me with a soft click. Not a slam. Not a bang. Just the clean, final sound of something done.